and welcome into the M&M Discipleship Podcast, where we discuss what it means to be a disciple of Christ. We aim to look for God in our daily lives, be in His Word, and strive to live out the teachings of Jesus. This is Dakota Moody, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Michael Round. Michael, how are you doing this morning?
Good, man. How are you?
Phenomenal. Doing
Yep.
tremendous. Yeah. I almost feel like I was listening back to the pod last week and I was very subdued because there are people inside the building and I felt very weird about being like very
Yes.
upbeat. So forgive me all those who listened to last week's podcast, but back alone in the building. So I'm back to my normal, maybe obnoxious self.
Well, people don't
This
realize
week.
how kind of awkward it feels to be recording videos in front of other people.
It really
So I'm
is.
with you. If there's ever
Yeah.
people in the building or like I'm trying to do something to get into it,
hmm
especially when you fail a lot of times and you have to do multiple takes. Of course, with this, we're just going right at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely get that.
Yeah. No, there was at my previous congregation, I was doing some videos and I'd take multiple takes and it was always it made me feel so self-conscious because I knew, 10 feet down the hallway, that secretary was just sitting there, doing her thing and hearing me just mess up a whole bunch of times and sometimes fail in jokes. It was on my own. Yeah, it was very awkward in that way. So yeah, it's nice to know that you can do this kind of thing and not make a semi fool of yourself, especially whenever the people who are in the room in the building only are hearing one side of the conversation. That's another
Yes.
part of this as well. And I feel that way not only when we're doing recording these podcasts, but whenever we are doing like any kind of video call, they're only hearing half of the conversation anyway, and who knows how's that's being perceived in their mind.
Oh yeah, what's this guy doing talking to himself? I mean,
Very animatedly as well,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. Taking imaginary friends to the next level.
That's right.
Did
Just
you have
do
any
it.
of
Just,
those, by the way?
what, imaginary friends?
Yeah.
I had a very active imagination, but I don't think I ever like had. I mean, I don't know. You'd have to ask my parents. I tell you what. Very weird thing about myself. I have so little memories of my childhood. I really do. And it's not like that they were bad. Like sometimes you have that whenever you've got like a very bad childhood and your brain's like actively trying to block it out. I don't there's something about my brain that was just like, let these things go. None
Yeah.
of this matters. Like, I've mentioned multiple times, like my first two memories that I can really remember vividly was 9/11, which is
Oh
not
yeah.
great.
Mhm.
But 9/11 and when I asked my dad to join the Cub Scouts, those two things, they happened very close to each other. And those are like the two things I remember vividly. Um,
Mm.
yeah, so I don't know why those lock in. So to be honest, I'd like to say that I really remember having imaginary friends or not. I don't really feel like I did, but a lot of that also maybe the fact that I was an only child. I usually interacted with things around me. You know this though. I had a lot of like dinosaur toys
Yeah,
and
action
like
figures and
Star
things.
Wars toys and even some like Pirates of the Caribbean toys. Like
Oh yeah.
I always had things to
Mhm.
interact with. Um and
And
so
dogs and cats,
yeah,
animals.
to an extent, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say I necessarily interact with them quite as much. I mean, the cats, I guess, a little bit. But like there was always something I was somewhat interacting with, but it wasn't like imaginary, in that way. I've built a lot of worlds in my own mind as well. So I don't know. How about yourself? What about you? Do you have some imaginary friends
Yeah,
growing
I
up?
remember. I at least had one imaginary friend. His name was Steve. Um,
Steve. You
yeah, yeah,
have
yeah.
all the
But I don't.
names in the world, and you came up with Steve.
Yeah, yeah. No, I just vaguely remember it. But yeah, I had him for a while, and I don't remember the reasoning for that or what inspired me to do that. But
Steve.
yeah, yeah.
There you go. Yeah. I'll also say this. Mike was a very boring child. Um,
I was a boring child.
I,
This is the first I'm hearing of this. He's
listen,
never told me
listen.
this before.
Okay, I'll just be frank. I mean, it's not that I didn't, love and appreciate you as a friend, but I just, well, for example, we went to Dollywood and
Oh yeah,
we
okay.
spent a lot of time, at the basketball thing because someone didn't want to ever ride the rides. Talked about this with Tony's Tubero before. You went down the one time face
That's
to face
right.
and then stayed in the car the whole time. Right. Not to say that we didn't have a lot of fun playing sports, because that's like the
Yes, yes.
foundation of everything that we did was we played a lot of sports and things like that. And that was very fun. But, I'd say other than that, maybe the dirt clod wars at
Yeah.
Darnell Farms when we threw dirt clods at each other.
Oh man. Yeah. And then I don't know if we should put this in the airwaves, but I
Oh
remember that
no.
same camping trip. We had an individual, like an older boy. We were young scouts, and we had an older boy take us aside and share all these conspiracy theories. That's the most I'll say. But he shared all these conspiracy theories and how he was going to just take matters into his own hands if
He's
things
in
were to happen.
he's in QAnon now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or in jail probably. But that was the thing about scouts is you have these like 10 or 11 or 12-year-old boys interacting with 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds. And it's just like they're trying to just figure out what kind of ideas can they plant in these kids' heads. And
And
yeah.
it's and from different backgrounds as well, by the way, because like I mean,
Oh yeah.
you had people come from, the backwoods, people. I mean, we knew somebody, and we will omit names here, that like ran a still out of their backyard.
Hmm.
I think you're having an issue remembering who that is.
I
I'll
am,
just like,
yes.
yes, I would say he worked for a certain the father who ran this still worked for a certain soda company.
Oh.
Um,
Hmm.
do you not remember?
I,
Okay, we'll
I don't
talk about
remember
this.
that.
We'll talk about this. We'll talk about this off air. He ran the still out of his backyard, and then we had somebody, Matthew Bolden, for example, whose father was an engineer, who he
Mhm.
himself has gone on to be an engineer, and so you've got two you've got a redneck engineer with a still in the backyard, and then you've got very well educated engineer, and you got totally different sides of the spectrum. So
Oh yeah.
you would think they're all going to come, well, like we're all going to come from fairly uh common backgrounds, but it was very different. So, and this is why I somewhat hate what has become of a lot of scouts in a way, because that
Yeah.
was so formational to our lives. Sometimes in good ways, sometimes in bad ways, but
Well,
very
and
formational
so
in a lot of ways.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because something I heard yesterday that I just can't get out of my head. It's I think it's in sociology, and I'd have to do more research into the specific origins of the theory, but what is your third place? So everybody has a home, or
Uh,
most people have a home, and then they have work. What is their third place?
mm,
And I guess as kids, it will be school instead of work.
right.
But what is your third place? And as
Mm,
Christians, our hope and desire is that church is our third place.
third place, yeah.
But to a lot of people, something like Scouts is a third place,
Yeah.
or maybe the gym or something like that. But
Mm,
so few of these third places bring different people together.
yeah.
And like how interesting that is in our society today. And that's why if we're a part of the church, we have a leg up because we get to interact with multiple generations. But part of the problem in our society is we hang out with people that are like us,
Hmm.
either at work or at school.
Yeah.
But what's your third place? Yeah, I wouldn't say Scouts was our third place, but it was probably
Well, it was for a
fourth or
time
fifth.
period. It was for me at least until
Well,
you
yeah,
guys in the third place invited me to your third place, which was church. Which, by
that's
the
true.
way, for all those listening, the only reason why I ever was a member of the Church of Christ, the only reason why I started to go to church where we did was because of Scouts. Because I joined the Scouts with Michael and his father Clint, who was the local minister at the Church of Christ, who invited us to be part of that. So and that's how that got started, and our friendship got started, and everything else kind of continued on from there. But for a time period, it was the third place until it
Well, and
changed. So yes,
it's interesting you said your two first original your earliest memories were 9/11 and going to scout or wanting to go to scouts. I was just thinking about how both of those things affect your life to this day. And maybe that's why
yeah,
you remember them. I mean, 9/11 affects all of us and how we travel and Big Brother and all kind of stuff. But uh
Patriot Act.
yeah, 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 exactly. And then obviously you going to scouts and the people you met there, and
Yeah,
obviously it changed our life when I wanted to go to scouts.
yeah,
So yeah, but
very
we say
big.
all that to say, things are going well.
There it is. Sometimes this can go in a lot of different directions here at that point. So there you go. And I'll say one final thought on your third place thing. The sad thing is the reality is nowadays is I feel like sometimes the internet is people's third place now.
Yeah.
And that's why we were at as a society. But I will leave that and let that
Well,
be.
no, you're right. I mean, we need a constructive relationship building third place, a place that's rejuvenating and
Yeah.
helps us and yeah. Yeah, that's
And a
why it's
place
so
also where
important
our
that we know
thoughts
one
can be
another.
on a places also that our thoughts can be challenged, not just a an echo
Yeah,
chamber
true.
of similar thoughts, because that's where we can form original thoughts instead of just regurgitating what we hear around us at all times. So that's very important.
Yeah, and we learn. That's a big thing.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
Definitely.
Well, with all this in mind, where have you seen God in your life, Michael? As we talked about our formational portions of our life, where have you seen God in your life today?
Yeah, it's in my third place.
There you go.
At church, there's been a lot of good momentum. We didn't have services a week ago Sunday, and of course, when this comes out, forgive me for the timing. On the 21st of January, we didn't have services.
Because of the weather.
So because of the weather, yes.
Yep.
And then so on the 28th, which is just a couple of days ago at this point, there was a tangible buzz in the air. People were
Mm.
excited to be back. So that was really cool. And just in general, with our life groups and things going on, I just see God working in the hearts of people, and there's a desire to be together, and that's growing, and so that's very exciting to me. And yeah, that's where I've seen God working and being involved. What about you?
Absolutely. Well, for myself, the place I've seen God is there's just a lot of things going well. Also, my third place, we had uh, a healthy number of people come again on Sunday and all those sorts of things. But where I've seen God really in my life is just where He is and has and continues to provide. Um, because there was different time periods over the last few months where I was concerned about different things, and obviously I've mentioned those in the podcast on a few occasions, whether it was my wife getting work or things like that. But things continue to fall into line, and I see just where God's timing and His hand and the way He wants things, He's wanting things to work at its own time, all comes into play because we're gonna have me and Anna are gonna be moving into our new home soon, that we're going to be able to enjoy that time by ourselves, to grow our marriage and our time together, while things are going well here at the congregation. And she's been working in her new job, and things continue to flow in the right direction. And I feel um, just like God is providing for us in this time now. But and I want to assure the people out there, there was a dry season at times where I didn't know where the next great thing was going to happen, where we continued to be at the average attendance we had been at before I got here, and you know, uh, and we also were living with my in-laws, and it was not finding work. So there was a time period where I was very low because couldn't do these sorts of things. I tried to start a college age Bible class here, and when you start something like that, you have some inconsistent attendance, and we weren't really able to get that off the ground. And so, with all those things, I was very much um, in a lull, and I was not feeling very fantastic at that moment. But as things go along, patience and trust in God, things are on the rise and things are being built up. And because of all that, now I say, okay, your time is when the best things happen. And I can look
Mm,
now and say, praise God for where I'm at now, but also praise God for where I was at before, because it
yeah,
was in that there was formational times. And so that's important, I think, for us all to remember. This is where I see God, as in we should be able to see God in the valley of the shadow of death and on the top of the mountain, right? We should be able to see
mhm.
him anywhere we go because he is constant. He is with us. Our life will vary and shift and change, but he is always with us, and he is always there, and he is always a glory and one to be praised.
Definitely. And I think part of the reason the Bible is so helpful for us is we get to see God's people and how he was there for them, even in those lulls, like you were describing, the valley
Absolutely.
of the shadow of death. And one of the best examples of that is Joseph and how
Mm,
God blessed him and God was there for him. But I'm
absolutely.
glad that things are going well. And we
Absolutely.
certainly want to think about the blessings that God has given us every day and be thankful for those. And one of those big blessings is our opportunity to seek him and to know him. And we're going to learn about that in Matthew chapter 6. I'll go ahead and read Matthew chapter 6, verses 22 through 24. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Baked into this is the assumption that we can serve and seek God. And that's something that we should be thankful for. But Dakota, when you read this, what do you see some of the problems that can arise when we get our priorities out of whack?
Yeah, so just in reference, connecting this with last week's message about not storing up for ourselves treasures on earth, but instead store up treasures in heaven. Well, then you get to this next section and you can almost attach it. Well, the eye is the lamp of the body. So what is that supposed to mean? If our eye is bad, the whole body is bad. If the light is good, if we have light, then things are good. What does that mean in reference to ourselves and seeking, well, where we store our treasures? Well, it's what our eyes are looking at here. The eye is the proverbial way in which we are seeking after something. So if we are
Mm-hmm.
seeking after the things of earth, the temporary things, the praise of men, all those sorts of things, earthly gain and treasures rather than heavenly rewards, heavenly treasures, praise of God at that point, then our eyes are bad. And we are not, and not only is just our eyes bad, but it causes the whole body to be bad, right? Because what we are looking after, chasing, and prioritizing, as you mentioned, prioritizing, is causing illness throughout our entire body, right? And so what we must do is prioritize the right things, have the right vision, and in so doing, everything will end up being in light at that point. And in reference to that with the two masters, of course, again, what is the thing that you are serving, that you are prioritizing, that you are striving after? Is it God, or is it the word here, money, which can also be translated as wealth, things that you can have, that you can be built up here, things that are not the priority, the best thing, right? Which is the things of God, the things of heaven, the things to come, the things that are spiritual. Instead, if your focus in your master is the things here, earthly things, then you're losing out on everything and you are serving the
Mm.
wrong master. And not only will you end up eventually suffering here because you are chasing after these things, but of course, the future is also going to not be very bright for those who serve the master of wealth here on earth.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and just too, like again, how important our priorities are in life in general, and because where our eyes and focus are will determine where we go. And so, if our focus is money, well, then there's no telling what kinds of things we'll be doing and involved in. And a lot of times, I think it's kind of like sickness. We treat the wrong issue. We treat the band-aid type issue instead of getting to the root of the problem. And that's more of where our desire should be, is realigning ourselves or aligning ourselves with God and making sure He is our focus.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that you pursue here, you can, well, anything you pursue in general can change everything about you. And that means that if your main concern is pursuing a wealth in the way of what men think of you, right? What people think of you. Well, you can change your entire self to try to please the crowds, please the masses, have people think highly of you in that way. But it is fickle and they can turn on you, and you can also turn into something you don't want to be. In the same way, if you chase after wealth, as Michael's mentioned, what kind of terrible things do people do in pursuits of wealth?
Oh yeah.
How many people cut down others, take advantage of others, destroy other people in some way, shape, or form in the pursuit of actual, like when we talk about wealth, actual money, as this is
Hmm.
translated here at that point. How many people do that? How many people do terrible things in order to gain a wealth of attraction of the opposite sex or something along those lines, right? Like how many people will do things that they would never do on their own just so that way they can have a relationship or have, relations with somebody in that way, right? Whatever we are striving after, whatever our first goal is, we can change everything about ourselves to do that, but it is a poison
Mm.
that cuts us down to the deepest portions of our being. But seeking the things of God will only embetter us.
Yes. And that will change our behavior. That's
Yes.
more lasting, getting to our identity.
Yeah. And
So
then, of
actually,
course, we have the temporary rewards and the eternal rewards as well.
absolutely. So thinking about this and knowing what you've been reading, you want to go ahead and share what it is you're reading because this really falls in line of the temporal versus the spiritual.
Yeah, absolutely. Every week we talk about what we read, and usually this is a book, right? We usually are reading some sort of book, and we have different books that we read, and we share from the same kind of books and things like that. But of course, books are not the only thing we read, and that's actually the funny thing. There's a study that came out recently because we think people read far less than ever because they're spending all the time on their phones. But the funny thing is we actually do read more than we ever have. It's just captions to videos or status updates or whatever else like that. So we're reading more words than we ever have before. Maybe not the most wholesome content sometimes, but there's also some good, wholesome content out there that can be shared in different ways. So, for example, Wes McAdams, he is a minister at a church out in Texas. He has multiple platforms in which he produces different thoughts and ideas. He has books that he's written. He has a podcast that he does. He's obviously a minister as well, a preacher, and he preaches the word. But he also has a blog that he has that is on his Radically Christian page. He's got a website as well, radicallychristian.com, and he's got blog posts he puts on there about different ideas. And this week, he talked about the difference between idols and false gods because we often connect those two thoughts together. And that shouldn't always necessarily be done because the false gods is something that we put in the way of God, something else that we focus and worship. But the idol is actually the kind of instrument of that worship in that way, right? And he represented this, the actual image for the picture, of course, was the golden calf in that way, right? The people were wanting to worship this golden calf, and it was not that they necessarily thought that it was all the way a different god than the one that they had been serving. It was just they tried to put it in a form in which they feel like they could understand in
Mm.
that way. But of course, Yahweh God cannot be put in this physical shape. There's only one thing that's ever been created in the image of God, Yahweh God, and that of course is mankind at that point, and the importance of who we are as people because of this, and the priority that we have to serve God and love God and love one another. There's a reason for this call because each man and woman is created in the image of God. And this is not to say that we should worship one another because we should not. We should only worship God, but we should treat our fellow mankind as an image of God in this way. And he talked about this, especially in the idea that there are some things that are currently in this world. We don't worship things in the way that they did in ancient times necessarily, right? We don't necessarily bow down to a golden cow at this point or things like that. We don't necessarily have these graven images, but there are things that we worship. And he talks about this as it regards: is there something in your life, something physical, something that you would hurt an image of God, right? Another human being, for them violating this thing, whatever it may be, right? And this is the exact terminology he uses. He says, choose one item that comes to mind with incredible sentimental value. Imagine someone desecrating that item, spitting on it, stomping on it, threatening to light it on fire. Does rage build up inside of you to the point that you might want to hurt that person? Do you see? Are we ready to do harm to an actual image of God in order to protect a false image, an idol to a false god. I would argue that there is no object in the world that is worth harming an image of God, a human being, in order to protect it. Humans are the true images of the true and living God. So, in this way, he is arguing that we should always prioritize people. And if there are things in this world that are making us want to hurt an image of God, another human being over that image, that's something that we can't allow, because physical things here on earth, they are temporary. They are not worth um, damaging what God has created in his people, in his image, in order to try to prioritize those things over an image of God in this way. God has a great love for his people that is far beyond anything here on earth. And this is something that we as Christians especially need to consider, because if we believe in God and we believe that we're created in his image, then we need to treat people as though they are in the image of God. And
Mm,
this means loving them more than we love other things. If you would hurt somebody, if you would wish to hurt somebody because of their sports allegiance, if you wish to hurt somebody because of their, this is very big, political allegiance, right?
mm, mhm.
If you would hurt somebody because of their ethnic allegiances, I guess you could say, like other things that we could separate ourselves with, whether that be, racially or whatever else, then clearly what you are doing is you are prioritizing whatever it is that has come between you over your allegiance to God. Because if you are willing to harm another human being over something that is not of God, then you are, in effect, protecting an idol and worshiping a false god in that way. And that can be very hard for us because we have a lot of things that we connect to in
Mm.
this world, especially things like our heritage or our patriotism or whatever it may be. But if anything comes between us and God and the image of God and people, then it can very quickly become us protecting an idol.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about too, and just like what brings about anger in our lives. Maybe that's a place to start.
Yeah.
You might not physically want to hurt somebody, but what makes you angry? And I think that's a good place to start and really dive into seeing what is it there that you're valuing.
Yeah.
Uh, Very good point. Well, and it's interesting. What I've been reading also continues with this. I've been reading American Gospel and basically tracing the religious heritage of our country. And one of the things that they were talking about is the public religion and how public religion is more it's more open. It's not as specific as private religion, but in our country around the time of the revolution, there was a belief in God, a creator, one who made us, nature's God, as I think how Thomas Jefferson describes it. But it wasn't a specific God in the public religion. So it allowed for Jews to worship. It allowed for Christians and whatever flavor of Christians were there, deists, Episcopalians, you go down the list. Um, but one of the things that was talked about was how this affects day-to-day life. And the thing that John Adams wrote about that I wanted to share today was about hope. And again, it circles back to our focus. We have a hope to be with God for eternity, and how special that is. So he said, John Adams wrote, "For I am certain there is nothing in this world worth living for but hope. And
Mhm.
every hope will fail us if the last hope, that of a future state, is extinguished." And going back to God, serving God and mammon, God and money, that hope is not worth serving. And John Adams said that nothing in this world. And he even said, if our hope of eternity, our hope of eternal life with God gets extinguished, gets stamped out, then all of our other hopes, everything falls apart. Everything fails us. And so again, it comes back to the concept that us as Christians understand that our hope and our faith is in God, and we know that He will never fail us.
Absolutely. That is at the end of the day, that is what matters more than anything else. And I think that is the point that Christ is making in his message on the Sermon on the Mount, in that wealth chasing of other things. I think that's also something that's clear within our conversation on false gods and false idols. Anything else we worship apart from God will inevitably lead us away and lead us to destruction and disappointment. And continuing on in this idea, but with John Adams as well and our founding fathers, is that the idea that anything apart from God is going to inevitably lead us to disappointment and despair at that point. And so this is something that I think we should take with us as we end here today, is that we need to prioritize God above all
Yeah.
else, above all other things, regardless of what that may be. He has to be the priority in all things, because in that, it's the only way we can find our true and everlasting hope, a hope that cannot be taken away from us, but a hope that instead will endure forever.
Yep. Jesus asked his followers to renounce everything
Right.
and follow him. So it's wonderful when it all kind of gets wrapped up into a nice bow. We thank you for joining us today on the M&M Discipleship Podcast. Until next time, let's look for God in our daily lives, learn from his word, and strive to live out these teachings.